Hello everyone and welcome back to our normal Thursday session. So it is, well, what a year it's been, hey. But we are now a year on since we started doing these, which seems a bit weird. But there we go, and we'll continue. Meanwhile, the world continues to rotate and you keep sending your pictures in. So hello to everyone that is new / returning. We've got YouTube Jerry's on. And actually gold star to Niels and Herb and Bo, because they were on a quarter of an hour before we even started broadcasting. That's pretty dedicated. Even beats Alan. Sorry it's late, but there we go. Right, let's move on to today's session. 1 hour as normal. Capture One version 21.1. We're going to edit your photos that you've sent in. This is a raw editor, remember, so it's not designed to do weird pixel-based stuff and sky replacement and all the other stuff that you can do with other tools if you so choose. Instead, this is about getting the best out of your images and getting the best out of your cameras, because actually that's what the raw editor is there to do, is to take all that data that your camera grabs and put it into the best possible presentation of that image. Now, we're on version 21.1 today as well. If some of you may have got on email, so Capture One launched a new set of styles. I know different opinions on styles and styles packs. Some people love them, some people hate them. I'm sort of in between. I've used some to a great extent and I've used others and thought maybe not. But there's a new set that came out today called Nordic styles, which actually, they're pretty good. We'll have a little look at them in a bit in today's session. But they're tongue-tied already. They're available even today. So you can have a look at those on capture1.com, I think. So let's get into Capture One. Capture One as our editing program. Remember, I'm going to be about 15 seconds ahead / behind you, depending on how you think. So any comments that you put into the comments box before we start playing with an image, it's going to be a little bit of a delay for me to see it. So if you've got any questions or comments, just bear in mind I'm not ignoring you. It's just taking me a little time to see them on there. That's the way that live streaming works, unfortunately. So here we are in 21.1. For those of you on version 20, remember most of what we run through today is easily possible to transfer to version 20 with no issues. You won't have dehaze. I'm not going to be using the speed edit keys on here because it's easier for you to see where the mouse is going and what the tools are doing. But there are a few small differences between 20 and 21. But for the purposes of following along and editing, of course, you can use version 20 for most of the bulk of what we're doing as well. Right, so we said last time that we would start with Brian's image. So this is the, in fact, first question, what is that? Is that a raven? Is it a crow? I don't know. I did this at school. Tower of London, they're ravens, aren't they? I'm not sure what they are in out in Jackson. But this is Brian's shot of this bird, which was rather handily perched there in front of, I'm guessing, the Tetons. But look at it. Now, this actually, Brian put this into the Facebook group to have a little bit of a discussion on, and also posted the black and white version. And a couple of different edits with different strengths of mountains and so on. And Earl has just proclaimed it's a raven. There we go. And Brian's confirmed it's a raven. Look at the beak. Okay. Problem is I don't know what I'm looking at instead. But we'll go with raven. Okay. So different variations that Brian's done. And it's really good. When you guys send in an EIP, I can see to a certain extent where you were going, what you were thinking with all the different changes, especially if you send it in with layers. So for instance, this one here, we can see what Brian's been doing to make the changes. But, and I did warn Brian, you might not like my my take on this. This is, I think, one of the processed images. And to me, I looked at the raw, I looked at the original. So if I press the Y key on the keyboard, we've got before and after. We can slide that left and right, or you've got the tool up here on the toolbar as well. You can turn that on or off. So here's our before, here's our after. Now, in terms of recovery, this is a really good job. We've got all the highlights back. We've got all of the detail in the clouds back. We've got the mountain stuff back. Looks really, really nice. But I can't help feeling we've taken the focus away from the raven, as it now is confirmed. So if I look at our original, it was all about the bird. It was all about that on a stark white washed out background. And I know it's really difficult because when something's as impressive as that mountain range behind, you really want to show it off. But then we end up in this conflict between, what are you showing me? Do you want me to look at the mountain first, or do you want me to look at the raven first? And that's where I start to struggle. When we start to bring back too much detail and too much content, it can be a bit of an overload, I guess is the right word. So we do this intentionally on cityscapes and stuff like that. So we'll intentionally bring in loads of traffic trails and lights and so on, because I want the person to get a bit of confusion when they look at that image first, to take some time to work out where things are and all the motion and energy. In this shot, it feels like it should be a bit more relaxed, a bit calmer than that. More about the bird. Whoops, sorry, didn't mean to do that. More about the bird and less about the mountains, incredible though they are. So I know Brian's going to hate me for doing this, but I'm going to start from the raw. And I'm actually, funnily enough, genuinely, I was literally just playing with these earlier, which is the Nordic ones. And there's these different styles. So we've got basically the Nordic styles are designed to take that, the very upper latitude, the very northerly light, very harsh light, quite unsaturated sort of look. And strangely, they've named them after the cities. So you've got Copenhagen, Oslo, Helsinki, and Stockholm. For each one, you've then got a different contrast level within each style. So hence the 1, 2, and 3. And I was playing with these and actually got to the point of this Stockholm style is actually pretty nice on this shot. Now, I'm not saying that you should always use the style patch, the style pack or anything, but there's something about sort of muting those colors in the background that really helps to bring out that foreground. So I'm going to start from there. Now, if we actually look at what Stockholm is doing, it's doing some contrast change, all the normal stuff. It's doing a bit of boosting of our high dynamic range, but it's actually reducing contrast and increasing brightness across the whole image. Now, that's also had an effect slightly of lightening the bird as well, but to me that sort of helps define it a little bit. And then I'm going to go really lazy here, which is I'm going to use our built-in style brush. So on our style brush, we've got our deep sky brush. Cool. And deep sky, I've got a brush size that's set. I could change that if I want to, but for this purpose, I think we're fine. And I'm just going to brush this over the background. Now, the reason I've chosen that deep sky brush is traditionally on a blue sky, it makes it a little more punchy. Let's call it that. But in this background, it's actually having the effect of just bringing out all that detail, all that drama, without needing to worry about overcooking it, so not pushing the clarity up too much and so on. And actually what it's done is it's lifted whites, it's reduced highlights, so you've got a bit of a seesaw going on, and it just defines those clouds a little bit more. Where are we? A couple of questions. Claudia, Kev with Stockholm Syndrome. Yeah, good one. So June's just asked, where did you get the style packs for Oslo? So those are the ones, if you're on Capture One's email list, you'll have seen it today. Or you should have seen it today. If you go to capture1.com, I think in the store they've got the styles on. There's 2 packs. I can show you actually. So one is Nordic editorial, which is the 3 different strengths of Copenhagen and Oslo, and then the other one is lifestyle, which is Helsinki and Stockholm. They're just broken down into 2 different packs. So each pack you can grab hold of separately. But again, they're options. They're optional extras. So if you choose to do this manually, of course you can, just by making those color changes and those contrast changes. That's effectively what a style pack is there for. It's a global style change to a set recipe, but to me they sort of look pretty good. Carl, you just asked, is there any Astro style brushes? So I built a play one a little while ago. If you go on to the Facebook group, there'll be a link at the end of this video. You can download that style that I've been playing with for free. We've just been, as I say, it's a bit of a toy at the moment. The challenge with Astro style brushes, and I'll be honest here, I've tested it on lots and lots of different scenarios. And the problem is, based on different cameras, different noise profiles, different subjects and so on, astro shoots can behave really, really differently from one to the other. So trying to find a generic sort of astro style brush is really difficult. The one that I've built works well for defining the Milky Way, for really getting a punch in the sky. On some images it works great. I haven't found one that it doesn't yet, but it's worth a play. There we go. Paul, are they a free offering? No, nothing in software is free, Paul. That's the downside. The upside is you own a cool new set of styles. But you know, genuinely across the internet, you're going to find this with style brushes as well as style packs. There will be free ones, there will be paid ones. People have made a point of it. You can Google all you like and find free style packs for Capture One. You can find free style brushes for Capture One. You will also find paid ones. Capture One produced their own set of, let's call them official style brush or style packs, as well as the style brushes that are built in. But you know, there's so much variety out there if you want to use styles. My challenge has always been I want my images to look like my images. So one of the beauties in Capture One is you can create your own styles. But these ones, you know, as I say, just playing with them, yeah, they do a decent job actually. There we go. Right, so what we've got at the moment is that original Stockholm style loaded onto the image as a base, and then the deep sky brush, which isn't necessarily intended for mountains and stuff, but it does a nice job here. And if I just do a quick before and after, we've managed to keep a lot of the raven as a subject, but still got the mountain. But to me, even that is still a little bit too much. So with my style brush, remember they go onto their own individual layer. I can pick on this layer and I can reduce the opacity down. So even though the style brush has gone globally, I can reduce its impact. Could do it two ways actually. One is with the brush itself. We could change the brush settings, so opacity to 50, that would do it. But the other way is we just pull down the opacity on the brush that we've drawn in. So I've drawn this, where are we, deep sky. That's gone pretty much everywhere. Let's just fill in a couple of other gaps. But it doesn't have to stay at 100%, and that's what the opacity part of the layers slider here is for. It's a really overlooked feature in Capture One, but it's so important because you can control every element of every change that you make and every adjustment just with that slider and on every single layer. Where are we? Andrea, no shortcut key for style brushes yet. Not that I know of. I guess the question would be, what, where do you end up? Do you have 26 shortcut keys for the 26 style brushes? I don't know. I mean, I guess in theory you could program in if you used one over any other style brush, but I think it's a bit of a challenge to have a shortcut key for every style brush. You're gonna run out of keys. There's only so many on this thing. So let's I'm not sure if we end up in a worse place or better place as a result of adding them on there. Jim, I applied to style one time and it did a lot of changes to the green elements. I didn't have green in my image. Ooh. Wish we could right click and see what it's adjusted. Yeah, I know. So obviously with any style brush, you can, so if I go into the background, because we didn't change anything, so everything in here is what the style brush, the style itself has done. You can go through here and you can see, and we can have a look maybe in the color editor to see if there's any alterations. There isn't in this particular case. It's all typically in here. You can see it, but there isn't a way, as Jim says, of sort of clicking a button and seeing these are all the changes at the moment. Maybe it comes in at some point. And Paul has just said maybe desaturate the mountain. So yeah, we have already, to a certain extent, by using that style and the style brush compared to our original, we've certainly lost the blue. But arguably it could go a little bit further. Yeah, maybe. So let's go back to our deep sky, and on saturation, at the moment we're at 0. We could take it down just a touch again. Although I'm sort of in a place where the subtle color is the key, is helping to differentiate from this stark sort of foreground here. Right, and I'm skipping a couple of things, but just to cover this because it's very important. So Joe's just asked, would it be better to put the style into a separate layer? You can choose. So yes, you can. So if I go to my styles here, let's just pick on a different one. So I don't know, Copenhagen 2, I can right click, and instead of applying to background, I can apply to a new layer or the selected layer. So I could say apply to new layer, go into here, and I've got a whole layer, which is my style brush. It's going to be automatically filled. I press the M key on the keyboard to see the mask. So when it creates that new layer, it's 100% filled, and I can back it away or add it again. It's your choice. If you know that that's the style that you want to use for the whole image, then putting it onto the background is fine. Other things to consider is there are certain things that can only be done on a background layer. So sometimes you won't be able to apply it to a layer, which is one thing to bear in mind. Right, and then lots of questions. Let's go. Where are we, Claudio? Let's get back to editing, shall we? So, don't we want to recover some of the blacks in the Raven? Yes and no. And I thought about this earlier. There is a challenge here, which is when we say recovering the blacks. Well, of course, we want the Raven to remain black. So, if I recover it, we're at risk of lightening effectively those deep, rich blacks in here, and we make them grey and a little bit off. So I'm sort of in a place where let's create a new layer, and we'll call it Raven. And with our brush, and remember in 21.1 you got the ability to link your brushes with a layer. So when I go back to a different layer, we've got our big brush. Back to this layer, we've got our little brush. To make that happen, make sure this is ticked, and you can link your eraser with the brush as well if you want. So with this one, I'm going to go for a very soft brush, quite a small one, 100% opacity, and start painting very roughly. Doesn't matter, as long as I stay within the Raven. That's quite important, and we'll see that in another picture we're going to look at today as well, as to why that can be a bit of an issue. But I could paint the whole Raven in. I'm just going to show you a quicker shortcut. So let's go to around there. That'll do for now. And I can click on the layer name, right click, and go to fill mask, and it'll fill in any gaps. So you don't have to fill in everything when you're painting a rough mask. So there's our mask here. Now let's see. If I recover our shadows and recover, let's say, blacks, we get all the detail, but it's no longer quite as jet black. It looked really cool and really quite punchy without that recovery. So it's a difficult one to do with recovery, but what I would be tempted to do is to pump up a bit of clarity and structure. And you see the feathers start to really come to life. You start to see all the detail in these edges here. So let's just do a temporary without. So if you want to see the effect of one tool, hold down the Option key or the Alt key on Windows, and then press down while holding it. Press on the mouse on the reset button on the tool, so you can see before and after. Before, hopefully that is clear enough, and after. And you should see it's just a bit sharper, a bit punchy, as it were. So we've now got the option again, in terms of that mask, of reducing areas where it's gone a bit over the top. So if we have a look here, let's just undo. You can see here on these bright feathers where they've picked up the highlights. If I now release and see what it's done, it's gone a bit too crisp, a bit over the top, a bit over sharp. So what we can do with our mask, let's get our eraser. So press the E on your keyboard or click eraser over here. And we're going to go for a relatively big brush, really soft, probably a low opacity so I can do it in layers. And I'm just going to start erasing parts of that clarity and structure over the bits that we don't want to highlight too much. So I do want to pull it out on these feathers, but I don't want to pull it out on those areas with the high contrast. When it gets to high contrast points, those clarity and structure tools will start creating halos around things. You'll start seeing artifacts around the edges that we don't like in general when we're looking at stuff. Where are we? Couple of things. Surge is late, but that's okay. But we will let everyone know that you're late. Where are we? Jan was saying a blackbird and white snow. Yeah. So, and about a tiny, I think Joe's just said about a tiny bit of exposure. Yeah, again, we can lift it. It's a tiny bit, and not too much. What is interesting is our deep sky layer, where I went over the bird a little bit. I don't know if you can see this on your screens, but it's slightly blue. So that deep sky layer has maybe shifted the blues to be a bit more powerful than they needed to be. So I'm actually going to desaturate this slightly. Not that much, maybe down to there, just to get that colour out of the bird and get us back to a natural black. So, Michael's just asked, as we stayed with the Raven, why not Luma masking? Well, we could, but here's one of the other challenges. If we're talking about trying to make a quick way of doing it, so I'll create a new layer called LM Raven for Luma or Luma Mask, and we will create a very rough brush. Oops, turn my mask on with the M key. Okay, so we can use a Luma Range to exclude or include certain bits. Now, all of the tools are in that Luma Range panel here. We covered it in quite a lot of detail last week. So let's think about the Raven's black. Great, so let's choose all of the black areas and let's get rid of any area that's light. And we're going to keep going, keep going, keep going until we get rid of all the areas that aren't the Raven there. But now we see the problem. Because I haven't just gotten rid of those areas in the background, I've also gotten rid of some of the other parts of the bird. And this is the problem, where the challenge with it is how to separate out. We say in our heads, the Raven's black. Not all of it depends on how the light's falling on that bird's feathers and beak and so on. So if we only wanted to include those areas in the Raven, absolutely, we can use a Luma Range, and then we can invert it. We can have some real fun with that. But just be careful that you're not excluding certain parts. Even though we know that this feather here is black, but actually it's not in the picture. It's reflecting light, so it's glossy and it's white. So Luma Range conceptually, yes, to separate out a dark bird, but just be careful that you're not excluding things that you don't want to exclude. Ian's just said you will see blue in the feathers for ravens and crows. Yeah, the challenge that I've got is in the original we don't. So I'm not disputing that there will be blue, and there is a little bit still in here. But in the original, which is effectively my comparison, I'm not seeing those tones. So what I don't want to do is introduce them on top when we're editing. Now, the other thing as well, bear in mind we're editing at 200%. So just be a bit careful when you're making decisions, when you're zoomed in that far. But in general, you want to be editing in details at 100, 200, maybe even a little bit more. Eor's just said, would not the snow underneath the Raven lighten up the underside of the Raven? Not necessarily, because it depends on the direction of light. And in this case, if the light were coming from over here on the left, this snow will be in shadow. You will get a little bit of bounce, and I think you sort of see that here, but it's not going to be a lot because the Raven itself is blocking that light from hitting it. You're seeing that effect here. So the snow here and the direct light obviously is illuminating this front side, but possibly not under there. Okay, so yes, we need an automatic selection feature. Within reason. The problem is, even with all the claims of AI and stuff like that, the software doesn't know what I want and what I don't want in my selection. It can be a bit of a challenge to expect it to do that. But anyway, so there's our before and after. Let's go to before and after. This edit is a lot less punchy, let's call it, than Brian's original one. And there's part of me that I sort of miss the fact that we don't have all of that detail in the clouds. But to me, this shot's about that bird, not the mountain. So I sort of struggle a little bit when we push the mountain this far. And even in black and white, I like black and white shots in this sense, but because the mountain's got a lot of contrast on it, we start to lose the shape, effectively, of that bird. Whereas here, and actually, to all credit to Brian, you see how little we've changed. So the original shot, it's a great shot. It's a stunning shot. But, I wouldn't push it that much further, because otherwise you're starting to lose the scene. And then, so Brian's just asked in terms of crop. Honestly, it's framed pretty well. If anything, we could afford to come down a little bit in the top, but I don't want to lose these trees. The trees actually balance out the bird. We could experiment and say come into here. Let's just go there. Maybe that's a bit better balance, but I don't see a problem with the three trees out here as a line. You could turn it into a panoramic, 1x2. So if we went to here, and maybe that's more of a print. That looks pretty cool. The extra blue up here isn't really helping us as an image. So, you know, the 1x2 crop sort of ticks a few more boxes maybe. But I'd just be really careful with this in terms of playing with it too much, to be honest, because it's a good shot to start with. Paula's just said trees on the right hand side cropped out. The problem is if we crop in from that side, you're going to see, in fact, let's just do it. Let's stick to our 3x2, so our original crop. And let's have a little look here. The problem is that raven starts to fall off the edge of the image. And I'm not suggesting that necessarily that's a bad thing. You know, we're not having to stick to, you know, thirds rules and all that sort of stuff. But this feels a little bit like it's being shoved out of the edge. If anything, Brian, you should have been a lot more considerate and moved these trees for our crop. That would have been much better. But no, genuinely, I think I think this setup, the crop that you've got, the framing that you've got is decent to start with. And Paul just said, what's the new version like in black and white? So let's have a look. So we'll clone that variant. And with this one, so we've got two ways of doing black and white. We could, of course, do it with the styles. So we can go into we've got built-in styles, or we've got black and white styles as well, but we could load in something like a phase 1 IQ style, or we can go into here and into our black and white section. And we get it here. So this is the difference then between the first one, so the original black and white conversion from, I guess, this, and this one here. And, you know, again, so I think personally I prefer the color one. But again, it's the same principle in here. If I look at the original black and white here, the bird starts to be lost. We need that contrast. And this is something as well, when we look at a picture, typically our eyes or our brain is drawn to contrast first. We're looking for shapes. You know, when you're a baby, you were looking for shapes moving in front of you before you were differentiating colors and stuff. And it's that contrast that's lost in the first edit, and it's lost from a good place. You want to show off the mountains. I get it. I love that mountain range, but if this shot's about the bird, let's make it about the bird. So there we go. Tom, yeah, real team edit on this image. Yeah, I'll tell you, you yell out instructions, and I'll just click the buttons. We can go from there. So that's it. And I said last week, you know, Brian might not like where I'm going to come from on it, but I know how much work has gone into this because I went through all your layers. There's Luma ranges and everything, and you've done a load of work in terms of defining this. If that's the preference and you really want it to be so much about the mountain, then use that shot. It's just, to my eye, when I saw the frankly original, I sort of got to a place of, this is good to start with. Let's just make sure we're nice and straight on that horizon line. Not quite. Now we are. Cool. Okay, so there's Brian's raven. Definitely a raven. There we go. Peter, so this was your Sand Dune shot. And I said I was going to talk about recovery today, so HDR recovery and some of the impacts that can have. So this shot, so one of the things that Peter was looking for was to get more detail out in the far out dunes and so on. So let's do before and after. So there's our raw, there's our final. My gut feel is, you know, we've got a boost of saturation. It's popping a lot more and great, but I think it's possibly pushed a bit too far. It just feels a bit too harsh. Now we're not going to go into choosing a style and all that stuff. If you want to do that, then play with your style packs. But what I don't know is what's in Peter's mind in terms of how this needed to feel. All I know is where you said you want more detail out here in the dunes. Now, the issue is with what's happened so far on this shot, if I zoom in here, we've got a bit of noise that's crept in, and that's a first sort of warning for me. The reason it's crept in is because we've done a lot of recovery here in shadows. pulling down highlights, pulling up shadows, those two in opposite directions, we're effectively creating an HDR scene. But that work to do that ultimately, and increasing saturation, will likely introduce some noise. And that's kind of what we're seeing here on the right compared to what was on the left. The second thing that you'll see when we do this is this down the side, and hopefully you can see that on your screens. So if we look here, there's a smooth transition. It's sand, a line, and then the guy's hoodie or jacket. With the edited version, we've got this bright sort of halo line down here on the back. And what it's coming from is this shadow lift. So if I undo the shadow lift, the halo's gone. And we've redone it here. So gone, and there it is back. So I'm not looking at this, I'm looking at what that's done to the edge. And this is one of the challenges with the HDR tool. We talk about halos quite a lot. And those halos don't just come from sharpening. So if you sharpen an image too much, in fact, let's do it. Let's keep an eye on here. Let's over sharpen the image, and you'll start to see these halos. They can be light or dark halos. If I really want to go for it, I can make the radius a little bit bigger. So if we over sharpen something, you'll see that the way it's done it is by creating a false edge. So an edge that we perceive to be sharp, by adding in some lightness on the light side, some darkness on the dark side, and getting a defined edge. But that's not the only issue and the only cause of haloing. You can get haloing from clarity, which is a form of sharpening, but also HDR. So if you pull up shadows, Capture One sometimes will go a little bit over the top, and it will spill over to those edges of where the shadow is, because it's got to somehow blend. So it can't just stop. If you think about it like like exposing actually. So where you've got an area, we've said to Capture One, right, wherever there is a shadow, lift it. It doesn't just stop immediately the second that the shadow stops. It tapers off. And as it tapers off, you end up with some of these edges also lifting outside of the shadow. And that's the halo that we see here. So the challenge was, let's get some detail in this, but also make it feel nice, I guess, without necessarily, making everyone a little bit sick on the screen, without necessarily getting these artifacts in here and some of this noise. Because when we go to print this, that noise is really going to irritate you. You're going to see it on the print. So let's create a copy of that variant. And I'm just going to reset these tools just a second. So we've reset all of the main tools. There was also a levels adjustment in here. Now, let me just show you. The levels adjustment was made after, obviously, we've done the highlight and the shadow recovery and so on. So the levels here won't make much sense because they're going to go across the data. But remember, the levels tool is designed to take what you have as a histogram and either stretch it or compress it. And we do that by pulling these lines in. So to stretch the histogram, to make things brighter and darker, we drag the line in to meet the data here. So that makes the things that were 20 now 0 on the histogram. The things that were 239 are now 255 on the histogram. Or if we want to compress it, so lose contrast, we can drag in the top. So the things that were 0 are now 29. The things that were 255, so very bright, are now 227. When you see a low contrast image, there's two ways of doing it really. One is with contrast. The other is with levels and curves. So you can achieve the same thing just by compressing that histogram, pushing it all into the middle. And you see that on the top. So remember, your top histogram always represents the active data that you're producing here in the screen, in the viewer. The levels histogram doesn't. It relates to the underlying data. So we are going to make a little levels change, but not a lot here. And what I certainly don't want to do is make the darks darker. Look at that hoodie. It's just disappeared. So we've got dark fabric already. I pull the levels up, we're going to lose all of that. So I'm going to leave actually the levels at the bottom end, hardly any change at all. Then what we can do is we're going to put in a little gradient over the sky. We need to be careful with his hat, but we'll talk about that in a second. So with my gradient layer, so when I create a gradient, it automatically creates the adjustment layer for me. I can rename that now and call it sky. And with our sky, we're going to increase a bit of clarity, give it a bit of a boost, and we are going to recover those highlights a bit. There we go. So we've got all the detail back in those clouds. Pretty nice. Just to be really careful and make sure we don't do anything to this guy here, let's use the Luma Range. And I'm just going to click Display Mask. And we're going to exclude that hat. So the opposite to what we did with the Raven, we're going to basically make sure we're not including anything on the hat. Let's just apply that so I can see and make sure we've still got all of the sky. There's a couple of bits left over, but I'm not too worried about that. And we've now got a sky that's more dramatic than what it was, but without having to affect anything around this guy here. Out here in the distance, let's have a little look. In fact, Michael's just said, since grains of sand are grainy and random, can we afford to introduce some noise into the sand? We can. And the way that, well, we're not going to intentionally introduce noise, but we can introduce structure, which one of the downsides can be that it adds noise. But I'm actually okay with that to a certain extent, as long as it's not color noise. So we talked about this last week as well, but there's a difference between luminance and color noise. Luminance noise in this case I'm okay with. What I don't want to see is green and pink and whatever dots in the sand. So let's create a new layer and we will call it sand. Now with our new layer, let's do the opposite. Let's create another gradient. So nice softer one here. If you ever struggle with the angle of a gradient, by the way, just plonk the gradient down wherever it is, then move your mouse over the edge further away from the middle, and you've got a lot more control over that angle. The problem when you're placing the gradient at the start is that you're placing it here, and tiny little movements get really out of control. So place it, get it down on the canvas, and then move it from the outside. It's a lot easier to do that way. So we're just going to move that there, and we'll move that down to there. So there's my mask. We're going to do the opposite to what we did with the sky, which is now exclude, potentially, some of our dude here. We want to keep all of that. Let's just exclude. Ooh, we want to keep some of the sand in. That'll do. A nice soft fall off, so we don't see that difference between what's masked and what's not masked. So obviously put in a bit of radius, so that's around the edges of this Luma range so that we don't notice it quite so much. There's no harsh digital fall off. And let's hit apply. So with this mask now, what we can do, let's go full on to town, full on clarity, full on structure. Now, this is over the top. Please don't do this. However, you can see how much of an impact that has to the sand. So here's our sand before, and here's our sand after. We certainly now have every single grain of sand. To Michael's point, we also have some noise that's introduced here. We can see there's some noise artifacts out here. Not particularly nice to look at when we start seeing patterns in this stuff as well. And it's over sharp. You know, that's obvious from anyone looking. So what we're going to do is just dial back that clarity. Clarity really no more than 40, ideally 20 to 30, something like that. Structure, you can use it for all of your texture, but just be careful you don't push it too far. If you do, it gets that really sharp, grainy look. So we're going to use probably about there. And now we have a lot more detail and drama in that sand. If we've accidentally clipped anything on here, so let's show our mask. This, of course, is a Luma Range mask based on a gradient. If I want to now start to edit that, all I'm going to do is right-click and say Rasterize Mask. So what we mean by rasterizing a mask, because someone asked this the other day actually. A gradient is a mathematical mask. So in other words, we tell Capture One where to start, where to finish, the fall off in between, and the angle. You can move that around the image later on. It's not fixed to any one point. A Luma Range is also a parametric mask. So in other words, it's a set of variables. It's number based. It's number generated. And those masks, of course, you can go in and edit the parameters later. You can say, well, actually, in our Luma Range, I no longer want to include 111. I want it to be 109, let's say. A rasterized mask is pixelated. It's locked in position. So now I've right-clicked and said rasterize. If I go back to my gradient tool, I can no longer change it. The gradient's gone. You'll also notice the Luma Range is reset. There's no Luma Range on it anymore. And the reason is because This is now set in stone as its pixels. So this pixel is masked. Not a range, not a gradient, but the actual pixel on the screen. What that means, however, is I can now go in with my eraser at a pixel level, and that's the key, and get rid of the stuff that we don't want in the mask. So you can use the Luma Range as a start to get going. Once you've done that, for instance, in this case, we've added a huge amount of clarity and a huge amount of structure in this picture. We don't want that on this person's shoes, or maybe even on the water bottle. We don't want all of that going over the top on this text, because it's going to look horrible. So we can now just use the erase function on a rasterized mask to get rid of it. Because I'm not changing anything mathematically. I'm not telling Capture One, move the gradient up or change what's in the Luma range. I'm literally deleting pixels from the mask, and that's what we mean by a rasterized mask. Alan said we need a water bottle removal brush. Yeah, but then it's part of it. I'd feel bad for him if there was no water where he was. We could use the helium brush, but it's probably not going to be too great. What we could do, just for fun, is pick on our entire subject of the image and just heal out that truck. There we go, gone. If we want the tracks, then we need to make sure they line up. There we go. Right, we've just removed our subject. Wonderful. But let's just undo that. To me, this now feels like we've corrected the stuff we needed to correct without pushing it over the top. Now, if we still want to push a bit more, let's go to our filled layer. So the reason I'm doing this over the top is, again, that opacity slider. I can control what's involved and what's not involved in this layer. So I'm going to say final adjustments. Oh, Tom. That's two people. Oh no, and Paula keystone the bottle out. I'm not sure we can do that. Okay. Let's set ourselves up to failure, shall we? Let's create a new heal layer. Oh man, this is going to go wrong. Let's see. So, where's our healing brush? I just want to know what it's going to build behind this bottle on that shoe, because it doesn't know what that shoe looks like, nor do we. Let's see. Nah. And to be honest, it's not really going to get there. Let's just try and let's steal a bit of shoe. Can we fake it? Oh, almost. Nah. Anyway, it's a gallant attempt, but it's not going to stay. Sorry. So, yes, and actually to Tom's point, I'm sort of making fun of using the healing brush in here. If you want to do that and you really, really want to, create stuff behind objects and whatever, you need to be using a pixel editor. You need to be in Affinity or Photoshop or something like that. It's just got more power. It's got more control to do that stuff. Okay, Jim's just saying I keep coming back to the brightness under the arm. The challenge is, Jim, I get you, but if I look in here, we're at 188. If I look at here, we're at 199. Out here, we're at 188. It is the same brightness. It's just that perception thing that says because this is so dark around that triangle, we think that it's brighter, but it is actually the same approach. On my final adjustments, I'm just going to fill this layer, and we're going to go and increase the saturation a touch, not a lot. We're going to increase our warmth a little bit and our tint. So I'm adding in a little bit of yellow as well as getting rid of any green and just pulling up towards that pink area. Then we get to a place where this feels maybe a little more dry, a little more arid. But again, the whole point of doing this on a layer, I can turn that off and we get to a more neutral tone, turn it on again and we get to there. But what we don't get to is here. The crop, I think the crop is right. Absolutely, Peter. But I think the top one, it's just been pushed a tad too far. And, in terms of bringing up all of the detail in this guy here, you've just got to be really careful. If you wanted to, you know, overall, you could pull up shadows just a touch just to get some of this detail in the clothing right. But don't push it too much. If you do, you're going to see what you saw, which is some of those halos and a lot of noise in the darks. In all this shadow stuff out here, you've just got to be really careful. That was the original edit. This is where we've got to now. You don't see this halo here. You don't see this noise. In this version, it's clean here, and it's still clean here in the fabric too. Okay, so I think that'll do us for this one. But there we go. Let's go again. So before and after, again, it's subtle changes. We're not trying to completely fabricate a scene here. We're trying to make it feel like it should, but at the same time, correct for any issues that we've got during the exposure. Where are we? Michael's just said, could you enhance the sand beyond the ridge you're sitting on? So out here. To be honest, not really. So remember we did that initial thing with pushing the clarity way up. Let's do it again, actually. So we're up here. Let's do that there. There's not a lot of detail out here. It's actually pretty flat. And the problem is when we zoom in, what we're doing by enhancing it more is we're introducing noise. This isn't sand grain. This is noise artifacts. You can actually see, look, there's some patterns starting to evolve here. Some unwanted artifacts that when you go to print, it's not going to look great. So I genuinely, because this is flat and it's going to stay flat, I wouldn't push it much more than that. It's going to go a bit too far. But yeah, there we go. Really nice shot. It's a wonderful scene looking out there. I kind of miss that sort of place at the moment. But going from here, which is, yeah, it's relatively flat. There's nothing wrong with it. To here, we've got a lot more feeling to it, a lot more warmth, but we're not pushing it to this level here, which unfortunately is just that bit too far beyond the edge when it starts to be a little bit cartoony. Okay, where are we? I want to pick on, we will go to Bill's. So on Bill's shot, sorry, let's get rid of Michael's comment. So we're back out in on safari somewhere. I can't remember where you said this was. Okay, somewhere with elephants. We'll go with that. So again, first thing I'm going to do before and after, and let's just look at where we were to where we are. And you'll guess I'm seeing similar things in here. And it's where we're seeing big levels changes, big shadow recoveries and highlight recoveries, certainly in this case. And then we've got more highlight recovery on top of another layer. And I sort of see that it's the same tendency. And it's funny because I've gone through this process as well. What happens is you start chasing the same thing. So you add a bit of clarity in one area and then another area looks flat. So we add a bit more clarity over there. And then that then means the original one looks flat. Same with color. You know, we push it a little bit warmer and that makes it go green. So we then shift the tint to be pink and then it looks a bit colder. So we then make it warmer still and you end up sort of running away with yourself. So I'm just going to go to a new variant of this same shot. It's obviously been rotated already. So we're just going to re-rotate. So the rotate tool up here, little plus in the middle of the arrow. Click along here. Cool. Love this little tree up in the top. So there's our scene, really nice scene. Let's just go to our lens corrections. We're pretty good, actually. I don't think there's much fringing anywhere, even on the high contrast points. No, so we're in a pretty good place from a lens point of view. So first thing I want to do is look at whether we switch to a different film curve, and whether we go to the linear response one. And the reason I'm thinking that in this case, so it's not always the best idea, and we've talked about this a few times. But in this case, this bright change up here, which we're going to want to reintroduce. But I see here a lot more detail, and certainly that mountain in the background next to the tree is starting to appear as well. So I'm tempted in this, because it's quite a flat image in terms of flat light, to start from linear response, because it's going to give me some room to move from there without that initial pop. So remember, the auto curve automatically introduces some contrast. It darkens the shadows and it increases the highlights. Linear response is more alike the original raw data that came from your camera. If we've got a white balance as shot, well, we can play with all our random different white balances if we want, but actually I'm sort of in a place of, let's bring up the exposure first to work out where we want that white balance to sit. So here's our white balance here. Now this is grass, so it's green lush grass. It's not, the previous shot, it's not out in the desert. We're not trying to create this sort of scene because that's just not accurate. So we've just got to be careful that we're not trying to shift the white balance to something that it wasn't. And what worries me is if we start to then increase saturation, it can get, as I say, it can run away from you and you end up trying to chase it. At the end of the day, this camera didn't get that white balance far wrong from what I can make out. We might want to warm it just a touch there. And that's more around time of day than anything else. We've got a lot of haze, a lot of, what do we call it? Oh, diffused light, sorry, mind blank. We've got a lot of diffused light in here. We've got a lot of light being scattered by particles in the air and presumably mist or haze here as well. So let's soften that up with a little bit of warmth because that tends to be what happens. So we've already lifted our exposure. What if we use levels now as well to further lift? And be careful with that mounting because we're starting to lose it because it sits out in those tones in the top. But also then pull in our shadows a little bit just to keep some contrast. Now the mid-tone in our levels tool, we can make the whole image shift to the left in the histogram or shift to the right in the histogram by going this way. And I'm going to do that. So I'm just going to push the entire image without pushing it off the edge. So the advantage of the mid-tone one in here allows us to shift the middle part of the histogram without pushing the edges, whether it's shadows or highlights, off the end. So no overexposure, no underexposure. We can shift the feel, and effectively it's almost similar to what brightness does. It shifts the middle chunk without affecting or risking anything else. With our highlights, I'm going to pull them down a touch, not too much, minus 20 maximum. I've still got my little mountain slightly in the background. I'm hanging on to it. We're going to have a look at that in a second. Shadows. Well, I can pull them up a bit, but just be careful that we're introducing a little bit more, a little bit less contrast by doing it. Remember, as you pull highlights down and shadows up, you're squashing the data in the histogram into the middle. When you do that, we lose contrast. So be careful that you don't push these too much. Then we do have our fun tool. So those in version 20 won't have this. Those in version 21 will, whether you thought it was a good idea or not. That's your choice. We can do this through curves. You can do your dehazing through curves and through clarity and so on. Or we can give our dehaze tool a little bit of a try and see what it can do. It's not done badly. I'm going to choose a slightly different haze color, maybe out here, and see what we get. Not much of a change, to be fair. Just trying to choose an area that gives me the best enhancement here. Yeah, that's not too bad. So again, before and after, just on dehaze. That's not a bad place, but this to me feels a little bit too rich. It's gone over the top. So what we're going to do instead is do that dehaze on a layer. And don't forget, you can do any of this on a layer. So let's create a new gradient. And I'm going to use the gradient to be really soft and stop down here. So in other words, affect everything up here and slowly fade as you get to the elephants and have less of an impact. With that layer, we're then going to use our dehaze tool a lot more. So if we want to include a bit more of the elephants, of course, we can pull it down a touch, but I don't want it to be 100% effective on those animals. I just need it to back off a little bit so that that front doesn't become too contrasty compared to the back. Right, let's create a new filled layer. So I'm going to make some new adjustments on top of that on a new layer. So the first one we're going to do is going to be some clarity, just a touch. Again, don't push this too much. We don't need much in the way of structure, I think. We're pretty good here. And you can see already in here, look, we've got a little bit of noise in here. There's some texture in there. If we start playing with structure, I've pushed it too far for sure, don't worry. But if we do this, that's not a nice look. It's over the top. So just be really careful with structure. Look at the detail of what you're trying to edit and make sure that you're not pushing it too far with both clarity and structure, but structure especially because it can introduce noise. Okay, then we get to a place of, well, maybe actually we look at color grading this. So in our color balance tool, rather than our color editor, we've got four or five different ways of doing it, but three main ones. So you've got the master wheel, which is the overall balance of this shot. You've got the three-way dots, and we'll cover that in a second. And then you've got individually shadows, midtones, and highlights. In this case, we're going to use the three-way. This is basically these three tabs all on one screen. And what we can say is, right, our highlights, I want to actually pull to be a little bit warmer. So up here, we're getting that to be nice and orange and yellow and so on. Our midtones, maybe we make them a little cooler. Maybe we make them a little redder. That's up to us. We can choose where that sits on the wheel. In this case, I'm going to probably just make them a little bit cooler. Just towards this blue here. And our shadows, again, we can really go to town. We can make it very, very weird, split-toned. So whenever you see something that's effectively two sides of the color wheel for shadows and highlights, it's typically seen as split-toned. It can look really good in an editorial picture or a fashion picture, but on a picture full of elephants, I wouldn't necessarily go down that route. But what I'm looking at is in the shadows, getting away from this green. So maybe we just shift it to a little bit. Maybe we go up to there. Just that. So if I undo and redo, you'll see it's just got a little bit redder, a little bit more, I guess, warm by doing it, but not too much. They're all tiny little changes just by pulling those midtones to be cooler and the shadows and highlights up the other way. Most of the change on this shot, however, is going to be down to your white balance, and this is where it's up to you in terms of how you want it to feel. If you want, this is a full filled layer, if you want the image to be warmer, then we can do that. If you want the image to be cooler, we can do that, of course. But I'd experiment and try and remember how it felt when you shot that picture. To me, it's probably around there, but I wasn't there. If I look at our before and after, that's quite a big change. It is. Certainly up in the sky here. Maybe this is a bit too yellow. Not sure. If it is, then we can obviously pull those highlights back down to be a bit more neutral. And actually, a lot of this color up here is coming from the fact that we recovered some of those highlights too. But this is one where, you know, you guys need to be the judge of what it felt like at the time and what you were trying to pull up. If anything in these elephants, there is one tool that we don't often use but could actually help here, which is, I'm just going to create a new layer called elephants, and I'm going to brush. And it's the contrast tool. So we rarely use the contrast tool when we're editing because it can be a bit of a blunt instrument in some ways. However, even just for this across that line, by using that here, we can get a bit more definition out of the elephants. Now, of course, we could do that with curves as well. So we don't have to use the contrast tool to do that. We could play around with curves to try and tweak this a bit more specifically. Use the Luma curve so that you're not affecting anything in terms of hue and color. But we can just tweak that a little bit more. Maybe there. Yeah, that's not too bad. So we go from here to here just to make them pop a little bit more. And then finally, my little mountain. Maybe, I'm not sure if this is on, I don't think I can pull this off. I may have been a bit over the top here. But let's go to my brush. And I'm going to brush onto my little mountain. And I'm going to try, let's go to 100%. I'm going to try and Luma Range that exact value here. In fact, we can find it. So if I move my mouse over here, we can get it. It's 210. Out here is 212. So let's see. Luma Range. Range, let's say 211. Oh, sorry. It was 210, wasn't it? So 209 to 211. Fall off down to 208 and 212. Let's see if we can get that mask. Not bad to start with. Let's fall that off there. Well, there. No, that's too much. We'll go with that and apply that. And then with my little mountain, That worked out better than I thought, actually. We can pull our exposure down a touch. Now, of course, there's a little bit of an issue down here. So let's go to our Luma Range again, and we're going to increase the radius to soften that. Not too much. We lose the definition of the mountain. And then from there, of course, what I can do, having done that, is I can go onto my eraser and erase the bits that I don't want. So it's going to ask me, oh no, it won't, sorry, because I painted it. It's not a gradient layer. So the Luma Range, remember, is still going to apply to the areas that I paint. So by erasing them, it now doesn't include it. If I add to it, this is one to be careful of. So I'm painting, but it's not adding. Why not? Well, because the Luma Range still excludes this area. So you've got to be a bit careful with that. And we might want to go to there, maybe. And instead, just erase the bits that we don't want. But what I have got is my little mountain back. But again, that's maybe just me being a little bit pedantic because I saw it out there in the distance. Rather than necessarily pushing it a bit too far. There we go. Okay, so that's it for today, people. So yeah, we've gone through, obviously, the new star brushes. Have a look at them. Have a play. But there's Brian's picture, Raven. Very nice. Again, it's just about making sure the subject is the Raven, not necessarily the background mountain. Peter's shot out here with the sand dunes. And again, it's very, very small changes that add up rather than necessarily going for a big sweeping change. And again, likewise on this one, if we look at these two, you know, and I'm not sure, maybe this is needing to be more green. I wasn't there at the time, but if it does, then just shift it a bit more and be a bit more green with that white balance as well. Cool. Right. So for those of you with other questions and stuff like that, of course, join in on Facebook, on that Facebook group. I can't remember who it was that asked, but the Astro brush that we created just to play with is on there. You can download. So go on there and have a play with that. That is free, unlike the style packs. But of course, remember, you've also got all the YouTube Pro Tips videos, which are free to watch, which cover individual tools. In about half an hour, David Grover is doing portrait editing on the Capture One channel. So for those of you that like shooting people, may want to head across to that and have a look. Remember, ready for next week. So same time, same place next week, next Thursday for another hour. Upload your files to there. So paulreeferlive.wetransfer.com. Remember to include your name and the raw file, and we'll see how many we can get through and edit. But between now and then, take care, everyone, and we'll see you next week. Cheers. Bye.